According to scientists, there have been about 50 million species on this planet. Only one of them has been able to process information. But what information would that one select? Think of what's in Britannica. You want to process that? An artist pictured a man at midnight gesticulating to the heavens, "I want." What did he want? He wanted answers. He wanted to know who he was, why he was here, where he's going, how to get there, who or what's behind the universe. Is there a mind that cares? Is there a heart that feels? These are the big questions. If a man doesn't answer these questions, or a woman, properly, they are likely to become a workaholic, an alcoholic, a drug addict, a suicide, or just plain useless, for life for them has no meaning. There are about half a dozen stories that claim to tell the answers to the big questions. The first one, in the West, the most popular, is atheism. Atheism says there are no answers, there are no absolutes, everything's relative, life is futile. But we have a right to be sceptical about atheism, because atheism teaches that from nothing, everything comes. Imagine it. From nothing, everything comes. Atheism teaches that from randomness comes fine-tuning. You know, if I held up before you a $2 piece and told you that if the universe varied by that much in any of its laws, there'd be no universe. But atheism says randomness created fine-tuning, and that chaos created information, that non-reason created reason, and that unintelligence created intelligence. Atheism doesn't recommend itself to people who think. What about Hinduism? The greatest religion in India. Well, it has millions of gods, one supreme god and millions of inferior gods. And the main thing it teaches is karma, that all the things you do will meet you again. Not necessarily this life, not necessarily the next or the next, but ultimately reincarnation, karma, reaping what you've sowed, and more. There's no warmth, there's no love, there's no absolute meaning in Hinduism. Then there's Buddhism, which says there's no God. And for Buddhism, the great thing is to eradicate desire until nirvana comes, which is nothingness. Then you've arrived. When you've arrived at nothingness, you have arrived. Buddhism has failed to appeal to most intelligent people. Mohammedanism. If you've ever read the Quran, you'll find that it's full of Bible. Mohammedanism is an offshoot of Christianity. The Quran quotes over and over from both testaments, so it's better to go back to the original. But what is the essence of Christianity that gives us the right to look to it for answers to our questions? All that most preachers seem to say, for many listeners, is only sentimental pap. Vague, indefinite, not stark, not significant. What is the essence of Christianity if we're going to look there for meaning to our questions? Well, let me tell you the story of an ancient king who lived 3,000 years ago, and his experience is a microcosm of the experience of the universe. He had 2 sons. Both were missing. One had killed the other. Now the murderer was in exile, and the king is harrowed. The king is tormented because he's a king as well as a father, and there's the rub. What do you do if you're the king as well as the father and you love your child? What can you do? If he doesn't do anything, his kingdom might dissolve in anarchy. He's supposed to show the difference between good and evil. He's supposed to punish evil so it doesn't duplicate, multiply, become fecund and fill the kingdom. How can he be a king and the father? How can he be righteous and just but loving to his son? And while he's thinking on these things and worrying, he looks through the window, glad to be distracted, and he sees an old woman dressed in robes of mourning, and she's heading for the palace. And sure enough, she asked to see the king. And I want to read you what she said. I'm reading from 2 Samuel. And will you keep in mind, as we look at this, I'm suggesting to you that this story will give us the essence of what Christianity is about, and it's right to answer our questions. I'm looking at chapter 14, and the widow woman who comes to the king has a message put into her mouth by Joab the general. Verse 4, when the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honour, and she said, "Help me, O king." The king asked her, "What's troubling you?" She said, "I am indeed a widow. My husband's dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field. No one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. They say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we'll get rid of the heir as well.' They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth." The king said to the woman, "Go home. I'll issue an order on your behalf." But the woman from Tekoa said to him, "My lord the king, let the blame rest on me and on my father's family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt." The king replied, "If anyone says anything to you, bring him to me. He'll not bother you again." She said, "Then let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction, so my son will not be destroyed." "As surely as the Lord lives," the king said, "not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." "Speak," he replied. The woman said, "Why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son." Note this next verse. It's a key to the whole Bible. "Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways so that a banished person may not remain estranged from him." What is she saying? We must needs die. We're like water spilled on the ground, can't be gathered up again. But God devises means that he's banished, be not estranged forever, despite death. God has invented a way to overcome death. What is she saying? Well, it's a wonderful statement, but it's not directed to duty, but to inclination. She's not asking the king to do the right thing. She's asking the king to do the easy thing. She's asking the king to do that which he wants to do, though it's against his duties as monarch. And the king is taken in as a result of Joab's scheming. Let Absalom come back. And Absalom comes back. He was the most beautiful man in the kingdom. No person in the Bible is given so full a personal description as Absalom. You know why? Because he's a miniature of Lucifer. And as Lucifer rebelled against the one who gave him life, so does Absalom. And as the story will finish with the king saying, "Oh, Absalom, my son, would God I had died for thee." And so the God of heaven loved Lucifer and has loved every sinner and has died for the sinner. Well, as might be expected, this beautiful boy with a filthy heart began intrigue against his father. And soon the word came to the king, "There's rebellion. All the people are after Absalom." The king doesn't want to create bloodshed in the city, the capital. He said, "Let's move out." And they go. But finally there's a battle joined, and we're told about it in the 18th chapter of this same 2 Samuel. The 18th chapter. And it's very important what it tells us, because what it's telling us is what could have happened in the universe on a much greater scale. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 18, and I'm looking at verse 6. The army marched into the field to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. 20,000 men? By every tree, a pile of corpses? What slew those 20? Listen carefully to the answer. What slew them? Mercy. Undeserved mercy. Had David done his duty and punished the murderer, his son, there would not have been 20,000 casualties in that rebellion. What slew them? Mercy. Unjustified mercy. Now this was God's problem. If God had acted like David when sin erupted, if he'd done nothing about it, soon the whole universe would have been in anarchy. He had to do two things. God had to show that the law was holy, sacred and good and had to be vindicated and upheld, or there could be no safety for anyone anywhere. The law must be vindicated, because the law is the character of God. It's only another way of saying God must be vindicated. Secondly, the sinner must be transformed. There must be set in course something that can change the sinner from a rebel to a loyal citizen. Remember what the woman said? God doth devise means that is banished be not expelled from him. What are the means that God has devised? I want to take you to another story. But first of all, let me mention something that we all experience and that casts light upon this problem. The seasoning of your life and mine is guilt. Guilt. The word ought shows our greatness and our misery. We all know a lot of oughts that we ought to do, and we don't want to do them, and the ones we do poorly, or just leave undone. Ought, that little word. No way of getting rid of it. Some people say there ought not to be any oughts, so they preserve them. Can't get rid of them. Some psychiatrists tell us that many breakdowns come from the burden of guilt. People staying awake at night, if I'd only done thus, why did I do that? Until they get sick. Breakdown. Guilt seems to attend everything we do with money, with time, with personal relationships, with opportunities. Guilt permeates them all. And the more honest you are, the more guilty you will feel. Because who loves enough? Who prays enough? Who praises enough? Who serves well enough? Who is humble enough? Who is always truthful? Who's a good steward? What is it to be a good steward? It means that we use every moment, every energy, every opportunity, every coin as God would do were he in our place. Hey, that wipes me out. And it wipes you out. Guilt is the seasoning of every life. It attends all that we do. All human beings, get this, it may roll a burden from your heart to understand this. All human beings experience outrageous impulses. All human beings experience outrageous impulses. Nonsensical inhibitions, temptations, complexes, obscene images, especially men, and vague fears. Now, did you understand that? All human beings experience outrageous impulses, nonsensical inhibitions, temptations, complexes, obscene views, and vague fears. But occasionally, you and I meet somebody, and it applies to you years ago and to me. Occasionally we meet someone who's been transformed, full of joy, full of gladness, full of hope about the future. They could stride over the world in 10-league boots. Everything's new for them. What's happened? Well, they've fallen in love. They're not being criticised. They're fully accepted. Of course, they're living in a paradise bubble. It will be pricked just as surely as sunset follows sunrise, and very often by the one that gave them acceptance. But is there a clue here? Does this experience, which most of us have been through, and some people have been through it many times, are there some clues here about reality, about life, about truth, about acceptance, about guilt? You know, literature is a mirror to reality. I suppose Shakespeare is still thought of as the greatest man in literature. And in Macbeth, he has the murderess saying, "Out, damn spot. Out, I say. 1, 2. Why then? Time to do it. Hell is murky." Who'd have thought the old man would have so much blood in him? Now the smell of this blood is still here. And all the perfumes of Arabia cannot sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh. Then the husband, he's speaking to the doctor. Can you not minister to a mind diseased? Can you not pluck from memory a rooted sorrow? Can you not raise out the written troubles of the brain? And with a sweet, oblivious antidote, cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff that grieves the heart. And the physician says, sorry, nobody has a remedy. And here, of course, Shakespeare, there is a remedy. But once you and I face the truth about ourselves, that we're not what we should be, we're not what we would be, we're not what we could be, none of us. None of us. Good book says there's no difference. I love that. There's no difference. We're not what we should be, could be, or would be. Then we realise that the real problem in the world is not the scapegoats that we invent, the government, that's bad enough. Educational system, that's not what it ought to be, despite good teachers. The weather. It's that ancient disease that the Bible calls sin. blights homes, breaks hearts, digs graves, insulted God, killed the prophets, robbed heaven, made hell the high capital of the universe. That's the root of the problem. If our questions are to be answered, the problem must be faced, and the problem must be met, and the problem must be solved. And the problem is sin. And you and I, by nature, are in love with sin. The giants that stalk us are sin, sorrow, and death, and they must be felled in that order. But to be an ethical person in a universe that seems non-ethical is agony. The ultimate question is, will you be a hero or a coward? That's the ultimate question of life. Will you be a hero or a coward? The coward gets rid of the pressure of guilt from outside and inside by pursuing the usual escape routes. Sex, alcohol, tranquilizers, the hard drugs, or there are respectable means, money, power, possession, but they're all chloroform masks. They're all cheats. None of them work. Millions have tried them and nobody has found them to work. They're cheats. They're chloroform masks. They're substitutes for life. They're only for the coward. There's another story that helps us solve our problem. Let me read it to you from John 8. This story, undoubtedly true, shocked the early church. And some of the scribes wouldn't even include it in the Gospel of John. And they put it down on the side because they didn't want people to think that Jesus was making light of adultery. But of course, that's not the point of the story. Let's have a look at it. We're in chapter 8 of John's Gospel. And Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him. He sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time. The older comes first, and only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir." "Then neither do I condemn thee. Go now and leave your life of sin." This was not only a problem for the woman, she wanted there to be an earthquake to swallow her up or flash of lightning to burn her out. Instead, she's in the middle of a jabbering, accusing crowd. And then the light that shines on her, that at first increases her guilt, but then heals her. For the healing presence of Jesus is much better than an earthquake or a lightning strike. But not only the woman had a problem, Jesus had a problem. He was the friend of publicans and sinners. But he also said he didn't come to destroy the law or the prophets. Hey, how do you reconcile those? How do you uphold the law that says thou shalt not commit adultery and say to this woman, neither will I condemn thee? What a problem for Jesus. Only once in the New Testament do we read that Jesus wrote. But in the Old Testament we read of God writing, and he wrote the Ten Commandments, and he wrote them twice. Notice here, Jesus writes twice. And the second set, remember the first one was broken, representing the sins of the people that had broken the law. The second one was put under the mercy seat. Why? Because the Shekinah glory looked down at the broken law, hole on the tables, but broken in habit of people. But the Shekinah, God, looked down at that law through a mercy seat sprinkled with blood. The only way God could deal with sin was to take humanity and shed his own blood. God became man. He became the last Adam. The first Adam, we don't know exactly when he lived. It was a long lot earlier than 6,000 years ago. Might talk about that next week. But the first Adam represented the whole human race, and we were ruined without asking for it. We were ruined by a representative. God doth devise means that his banished be not expelled. The means, God comes down as our representative. Ruined without asking for it, redeemed without asking for it. Ruined by a representative, redeemed by a representative. Oh, it's wonderful to learn that God is not asking something, he's offering something. You know, the thing that touched my heart when I was a young boy, I came to believe that God was good. I didn't believe that originally. I pictured him like a policeman looking down through a trapdoor, noticing all the wrong things I did, and there are plenty of those. But somehow the thought came to me, maybe from a little book I read called Steps to Christ. It said the love of God's revealed in every spire of springing grass. It's reflected in every water drop. And the thought that God was good. God's not demanding something, he's offering something. He doesn't say, reconcile yourselves. He says, I've reconciled you, accept it. You know, the passage that Eliezer read to us says, as though God did beseech you by us, be ye reconciled to God. Fancy God beseeching us, sinners, worms. God beseeching worms. Accept what I've done for you. Here's the means. I've taken your place. I've honoured what's right, that law that represents my character. I've vindicated it by suffering the penalty for its violation. And if you will look at it, if you look at the event, sin brings wrath, and God suffered wrath from God. Wrath is not what we think of, irascibility, changeableness, moodiness. Wrath in the Bible is the inevitable recoil of holiness against all that is destructive. And sin brings wrath, and God the Son endured it. Sin brings dereliction, and God the Son cried out, my God, why? Why? Why have you forsaken me? Sin brings suffering. He suffered so terribly. More in the mind than the body. He suffered. Sin brings sorrow. He became a man of sorrows. Sin brings destitution. He had nothing, not even a loincloth. That's the invention of a squeamish medieval artist. Sin brings darkness. The sun goes into eclipse, representing his mind, representing the attitude of God to him. Sin brings death. And by death he destroyed him and had the power of death. From the beginning to the end of the Bible, it's all about the love of God. If only we could get people to believe it, that however sinful, however foolish, however stupid, however vicious, they can be surprised by joy, the joy of the gospel. William Tyndale said that good, glad and merry tidings makes the heart to sing and the feet to dance. If only people could believe it, They can be surprised by joy if they listen to the gospel. Listen to what I say next. Never forget this. The most blotched, the most wretched, the most miserable life can be made to blossom again. Have you got it? The most blotched, the most wretched, the most miserable life can be made to blossom again if the gospel is understood and embraced. If we really learn that God's already reconciled to us. He devised means to save us. He came down and took our place in every way except sin. He took our penalty. He took our guilt, that he might give us his righteousness, that he might make us new, make us a new creation, as Eliezer said. If only we could believe that. For that is the gospel. Let's pray. Thank you for the good news, which answers all our other problems in solution. For if we know you are good and wise, we can trust you with all the rest. Help us to know you're not demanding something, you're offering something. Help us to really believe that the most blotched, the most wretched, the most miserable, the most ruined life can blossom again if the good news of the love of God is received, believed, and lived. Grant we may live it. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.